Alrighty, so your first lecture is going to require some setup for us to do, for you to actually do the work of the lecture. Because we use, as I've mentioned before, GitHub. And as I mentioned in the start here, why it's important to join early is so that you can get into the organization. So the GitHub organization is what you're invited to, and I will have invited you, and you will have to, in your GitHub account, actually accept that invite. Now, if for some reason, and it should be sent by your email, but if for some reason it's not, you can actually just click here on this link. And if you've been invited, you will see a little pop up that says join. Okay, so again, there's two ways you could get here. One is just clicking on an email, because once I see it, I'll invite you, or clicking here. Now, once you're here, now we're going to do the fun work. And this is where you're going to create a repo. Now, remember, this is inside of our GitHub organization. Later, matter of fact, I think next week, we'll actually use your own GitHub, right? So like I showed you before, you have, I'm signed in, here's my profile, right? I have my own version of my own kind of, you might think of it as a folder, but my own place on GitHub. And then you have, in the case of this class, joined an organization which has got its own GitHub, GitHub um, folder structure. So now we're going to create these repos. You're going to create two of them. Okay. So you're going to create one, and here's the naming standard I want you to follow. And please do follow this, because I've had students do this piece, and sometimes I can tell how closely you pay attention to instruction about how well these names come out. And the thing is, we see them all semester. Well, actually, let me say this. There's actually what's called a private repo. That's why I have you put it PRI, and a public one. And then I tell you use your first name and then the first letter of your last name, a dash, and then private for one and public for the other. And this is just an or. If you don't know, that's okay. Programming, you'll learn some of that. All right. So, but just FYI, just because I think it's good to know, is that with this public one, this is basically is anybody can view it on the web. It's the same as creating it in your own version of GitHub, or your own private repo, your own private GitHub, so to speak. But let's just walk through this now that I've talked too much about it. Okay. So while you're here, right, when you're in here, and hopefully your interface looks like this. GitHub will change typically, and so sometimes they will look a little different, but you'll come in here and you'll create a new repo, and notice how public and private. And so I'm going to do my first name, right? The last letter of my first letter of my last name, dash, okay, PRI for the private one. So notice how the first one is private. It's actually default selected. Go ahead and do a README file. We'll talk about git ignore later. Don't have to worry about licenses for this class, and just go ahead and hit create. Okay. So that's the private one. So you've created your first repo on GitHub. Maybe not your first. It might not be your first, but for many of you, I suspect it is your first one. But now we're going to create another one. Okay, so back here, back in 82. Let me do that. I did that a little quickly. Notice how when you do this, you see a directory structure like listing, right? We're going to create another repo. So you'd want to go back to CIT82, create new, right? Oh, actually, yeah, no, that's right. I wasn't following my own instruction. Okay, so now what are we going to do? We're going to do that same thing, but this time we're going to do public. Okay, so let's do my name, first letter of my last name, dash pub. Now here's the key: is you actually need to select public here. Uh, it's good to give it a short description. I should have done it on the other one. Reals public repo for CIT82, right? Go ahead and do that README file again. Don't worry about a license or the git ignore. Go ahead and create it. Okay, so now we have two repos. Okay, so let's go back here again. What will happen is as people start joining the course, you will see their public repos show up, but not their private. And this is what's important to understand: is the private only you and I will see, but public everyone in the course will see. Okay. So remember, it's important. You're going to need both of these through the semester. And matter of fact, I'm going to do another step here because it's really helpful as well, because we'll end up in your public one also using a folder that if we create it now, it makes some of the next work we're going to do a little bit easier. Okay. So over here, I'm actually going to say create a new file. And remember, I'm only working in public here. We could work, actually, we could work in private as well because you're going to need one over there as well. So let's actually do this one and then we'll do it again in the private one. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give it a folder. So I'm going to call it images and then I'm going to hit the forward slash. And what that does is that creates the directory, and it's not creating a file yet. It's created a folder. And now I'm going to call a readme .txt, and that's a very common file. Matter of fact, it's what was created in the repo when we had it before. We don't have to give it any content at this point. We'll just say create that file, and we'll use what's called the default git commits, which we'll talk about in a bit. Okay, cool. So that part now is done, and now let's go do this same thing in your private one. Okay, so in your private one, we're going to do that thing again where we go create a new file. We're really creating a folder, but we're also creating a file. And this one will be called lectures. Okay. So under lectures, hit forward slash. Again, that creates the folder. And then we'll do that again, readme.txt. TXT is a file extension for a text file, but we're not going to do anything but just commit this new file. Now, by the way, you'll learn over time about these commit messages and the importance of them, but I'll leave that discussion for later. So now, cool. So now you have, at this point, two repos, your public and your private one. And within those repos, you now have a folder called lectures. And then in the public one, you have one called images. Okay. So this is what you need to do for this point. And now we'll go ahead and stop this video so we can pick it up on the next one. All right. Hope this helps.